Hey everyone, it's been a little while. I completed the challenge. I got through all 100 movies, which is pretty awesome. But after that, I decided to take a break from just making content for, a few days, and that turned into a few weeks. So, let me tell you about the rest of the movies I watched, and I can finally get this shitty series over with. So first up, I watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which we discussed on the podcast, which you can go listen to if you want. Brendan is a bitch. After that, I watched the Three Colors trilogy, which is a pretty interesting series of films. Each of them are essentially made to represent one aspect of the French flag, or what those colors represent. It's an interesting little trilogy. They're all solid films. I think the best is definitely red, and the worst is certainly white. But they're all very interesting. I'd recommend checking them out. I'm gonna zoom through these because I don't remember them very well. After that, I watched Top Secret. This is a pretty enjoyable, fun little comedy film. It has a lot of enjoyable gags. I believe it's made by the same guys who made Airplane. If you enjoyed that, you'll probably enjoy this. It is decent. After that, I watched the Kung Fu Panda trilogy, which was surprisingly great. The first two movies are especially amazing. They look way better than I expected them to, and the second movie has some incredible emotional moments that I did not expect to impact me the way they did. That being said, I will say the third movie is definitely not as good, but the visuals of that film, I think, hold it up to still be an enjoyable watch. After that, I watched Sunset Boulevard, which is a pretty interesting, noir film. If I remember correctly, I think this film is pretty influential in that it starts off with the main character dead in a pool, which definitely, it draws you in, kind of makes you wonder what happened to him. Enjoyable watch, good film. After that, I watched Lifeboat, an Alfred Hitchcock film, which is decent. It's kind of too slow, I find. It was decent. I feel like I just am not a big fan of Hitchcock. After that, I watched Paisan, or Paisan, or however the fuck you pronounce it, which is it's a collection of short films, essentially, all involving war. And I think I would have enjoyed this film, but honestly, the performances really aren't very good a lot of the time, especially in the first one. Still a decent watch. After that, I watched The Last Airbender, which is not as bad as I expected. I think that's because I've never watched any of the Avatar TV show, but it really wasn't that bad to get through. It honestly was just really funny and very stupid and fun. It wasn't good, but definitely not as bad as I expected it to be. After that, I watched Apocalypse Now, which is just incredible. One of the most visually stunning films I've ever seen. The descent just into madness is so incredibly well made, and it feels almost like as you get further and further in, the people they meet almost feel more and more rational in a way, which is really interesting. Amazing movie. After that, I watched All About Eve, which is a pretty great film. Just kind of a very interesting story of the woman who manipulates her way into the Hollywood, or not Hollywood, but the Broadway. Good film. Then I watched I Live in Fear, a Kurosawa film. Just a beautiful, haunting piece about a man who is just terrified of nuclear weapons and the threat that they pose. Probably the best film, I think, that shows just the intense fear that occurred during the Cold War surrounding nuclear weapons and the thoughts of, nuclear annihilation. Amazing film. Also, Toshiro Mifune plays the lead in this movie, and he was I think 30 at the time, and the makeup that he puts on and his performance is incredible. He very convincingly looks like he's, 60 or 70. After that, I watched Wreck-It Ralph, which is a pretty fun animated movie. It's well made. It looks nice. Yeah. After that, I watched The Apartment, which is another pretty good film. It's a very interesting and odd story, I guess. Not one that super captivated me, but it's worth a watch. After that, I watched Hotel Rwanda, which I think is a really great film, despite it kind of falling into like a more Hollywood-esque formula. The story is really fantastic and harrowing, and I'm glad it exists. After that, I watched The Shop on Main Street, which is a haunting, terrifying war film in which a man becomes the Aryan controller of a old Jewish woman's shop, and just his struggle as he becomes friends with this woman, but is also pressured to hate her and despise her by those around him. It's a beautiful film. It's haunting. It is harrowing. Incredible. After that, I watched Germany, Year Zero. It's one of the few films that I think really shows the utter destruction that occurred in Germany at the end of World War II and the consequences for the normal people living there. That being said, it is not very well acted. The lead boy in the film I just don't think gives a very good performance, but it's not. It's still worth a watch. After that, I watched Winterlight, which I realized this film inspired First Reformed, but kind of the angle that each film takes feels drastically different, and Winterlight is incredible. It's hard to describe. It's such a deeply personal feeling film, and one that dives really deep into relationships. It's a good film. After that, I watched Howl's Moving Castle. We talked about it on the podcast. You can check that out if you want to hear my thoughts on it. Great film. After that, I watched Strike. This is directed by the same guy who did Battleship Potemkin. And whereas Battleship Potemkin is a pretty, it's a super influential film, and the use of montage in that film is really fantastic, I think Strike just feels very disconnected. And while I think it does a great job of showing why strikes are necessary, and also how business owners are so ruthless against those who strike, it definitely does not feel super cohesive. After that, I watched Scandal, which is a wonderful Kurosawa film. Just a super funny, entertaining film that has, as usual, it's brimming with humanity, as like all of Kurosawa films are. Fantastic time. Would highly recommend. After that, I watched True Stories, which is an incredible film. It is kind of just a celebration of weirdness, and also it feels like the entire film is in awe of just technological progress and how far we've come as like a species, I guess. It's directed by David Byrne, who is the lead singer of the Talking Heads. It's exactly what you would think a film by David Byrne would be like. Incredible. After that, I watched Land of Mine, which is a really depressing film about German prisoners of war, specifically young boys who were forced to clean up mines placed on Danish beaches, I think. Great war film. Very depressing. Would recommend. It looks fantastic. After that, I watched The Cranes Are Flying, which we are going to be talking about on the podcast next week. So, I won't give my score here yet. Wait for the podcast. Fuck you. After that, I watched Halloween. It's a very well-made horror film, but I have to say, I feel like the reputation of Halloween really gets ahead of the film itself. I feel like all I've heard about Halloween is just how scary and terrifying a lot of the scenes in it are, how well built up everything is. And while I feel like it's built up well, it was never really scary, I guess. I was expecting more, but I never really got the shock that I wanted from it. After that, I watched Boy, which is a Taika Waititi film. This is one of his earlier films, and it's just a really off-the-wall, offbeat comedy about a boy meeting his father for the first time and kind of coming to terms with the fact that his dad was kind of terrible. Yeah, it's a really enjoyable film. After that, I watched Panther Panchali. This is generally considered one of the greatest films of all time. It's a classic. I can definitely see its influence on film. That being said, I did not enjoy this film at all. it is very boring. It's very much just like you get to watch this boy grow up, and there isn't much of a narrative other than you just see things that happen in his life. And honestly, it just wasn't interesting to me. Maybe in a few years I'll rewatch it and love it or something, but it never captured me. There wasn't like a narrative hook or anything that drew me in, and I think that's really what I needed from this film. After that, I watched Where Is My Friend's House, which is a wonderful film. It's just about a boy desperately trying to get a notebook back to his friend so he won't be expelled from school. And it's adorable. Really, this film is just about communication and how the culture that it is placed within, there is kind of a lack of communication between not only child and parent or child and adults, but also between adults in general. People in this film will repeat the same thing over and over again to someone else, and the other person just won't answer their question or do what they ask. And it takes so long for anyone to respond to someone else in a way that engages with what they're saying. And I think that it's beautiful and it's wonderful. It's really funny, I have to say. I would highly recommend it. It is a bit slow, but still incredible. After that, I watched The Evil Dead, which is a wonderful low-budget horror film. Of course, it's directed by Sam Raimi. It's so much fun. Effects and makeup are fantastic. The performances aren't great, but I can kind of forgive that with this being so low budget and with just the effects being so fun and creative. I do wish the tree rape scene wasn't in it. That shouldn't have been in your movie. For something that is so fun and gory and fantasy inspired, for something like that, it feels so out of place to have sexual assault of some sort in your film. It kind of just saps all the fun out of it, basically, to have something so real and shocking in your film compared to the dumb gory zombies that are in it. After that, I watched Restrepo, which is a documentary about a group of soldiers during their deployment in Afghanistan, it's a very interesting documentary. It's not necessarily as critical of the war as I wish it was, but it's also really interesting to just see the soldiers and how they act in the situation, how they deal with what's going on, but also the way that some of these soldiers act. It just feels so awkward and weird. There's this one commander guy, I don't know what rank he is, but at one point they accidentally kill 5 people, just innocent people, and injure more, and his response isn't holy shit, I just accidentally killed people because my information was bad. What the fuck, I need to be way better. His first response is god damn it, I made a bad impression on them. Yeah, you did, fucking idiot. The way he talks with the people there is easily the dumbest thing I've ever seen. He is so uncharismatic, it's impressive. As someone who feels they're not very charismatic, he is fucking bottom of the barrel. Dude has no tact or charisma in the slightest. Anyway, after that I watched Paprika, which is the gorgeous animated film, but also what the fuck. Towards the end, it kind of feels like it just gets incomprehensible with how weird and out there the ideas are. I'm just not sure what to take out of it by the end. After that, I watched Aparajito, which is the sequel to Panther Panchali. Spoilers, I didn't like this one very much either. I think I liked it a little bit better because I found the environment in which it's placed to be more interesting, but it kind of just has all the same problems as the previous movie to me. Then I watched They Shall Not Grow Old, which is a Peter Jackson World War I documentary where they restored a bunch of footage. It isn't very good, I have to say. The footage is beautiful, but it's just ruined by the way they use it. I don't need extra action or movement in these shots. It's so much more interesting to just see the footage as it is, restored. And adding all these extra things to it just took so much out of the movie for me. I feel also the way in which you just have World War I veterans talking about their experiences over the footage, it's interesting, but it's too much. I just found I could not pay attention to what they were saying because it was just too much of a sensory overload. The battle sequences especially I found to be really bad because there's no footage, so often they just use still images to give you the sense of battle and noises, and it's just not convincing. After that, I watched Space Jam, the original. It's fucking awful. There's one good joke in the movie, which is when fucking Newman is digging a hole in the golf course. That's pretty funny. The rest of this movie's terrible, though. After that, I watched Frances Ha. It's a Noah Baumbach film. I hope I said his name right. And I think it really does a good job of capturing the anxieties of someone who is unemployed and their struggle to just kind of survive in New York. It's pretty wonderful. There's just such a wide range of characters and everything feels just so natural. Good movie. After that, I watched Beau Travail, which is a beautiful atmospheric film that I think really, it does such an interesting job of tackling masculinity and the ways that it affects the way in which men interact with each other. Beautiful film. It's very slow, but it's beautiful and hypnotic and really interesting. I especially like how often you see a lot of these big, muscly men doing jobs that are typically associated with women or are considered more feminine. I don't know. Super interesting film. After that, I watched The World of Apu. I didn't like this one either. I think it's the best out of the three, but just nothing for me to grab onto. I just am not invested in the story. After that, I watched Shame, which is a beautiful and haunting film, mainly about the way in which war so just terribly affects the lives of the normal people who are caught in the middle of it and how it just tears them apart. It's a really incredible film. Ingmar Bergman, he good at directing. After that, I watched the documentary Forsama, which is just a really beautiful, interesting look at the war in Syria, specifically at all the people who are just helping and trying to, survive as this just regime keeps bombing them and closing in on them. It's really beautiful and fantastic and very depressing. After that, I watched Man with a Movie Camera, which is a silent film that it's very much in the vein of Koyaanisqatsi. I hope I'm saying that right, where it's kind of just this slideshow almost of images of cities and buildings and people, and it's just a really interesting view of humanity. It's also really cool. You often get to see shots of people or an object or something, and then you get to see how the cameraman got those shots, which is really cool. After that, I watched Grave of the Fireflies, which is a incredibly depressing, haunting war film, a very similar vein to Shame, about just how it affects normal people and destroys their lives. Beautiful film. Super depressing. It made me cry. And then the last movie on my list is Your Name, which it was alright. It was decent. This film is such a weird mashup of different ideas. It feels so scatterbrained. So much stuff goes on in this film, and it constantly takes weird turns that feel like they're out of nowhere. I have to say, the beginning of this film I really did not like. The first 30 to 40 minutes are just a really uninteresting body swap movie that has musical sequences in it that are bad. There's often just parts where you see montages of stuff with a song over it, and I didn't like the music at all. Very bland, boring, Japanese, rock, I guess? Whatever, that emotional anime music is. that genre. But after that, the film takes a turn, which I won't spoil, which just makes it instantly a lot more interesting. And then after that, it becomes less interesting again, as they have to like figure out how to stop the thing that happens. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's kind of just a mess. It's enjoyable, it's beautifully animated, but just a mess. And then, I had completed the list at this point, but I figured, I got like 2 hours left. Let's watch one more. So of course, I watched Verdemic, Shock and Terror, one of the greatest films ever made. It is one of the funniest films I have ever seen. It's just incredible. I can't really say much more that hasn't already been said about this film, but it's a masterpiece. So hilariously bad. It's amazing. And yeah, that's it for the list. I guess yeah, I did it. I watched 100 films in a month. Actually 101. So cool. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, please like it, comment what your favorite movie from my list is. I don't know. What are your thoughts on them? Yeah. Oh, don't forget to subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day.